78 years have passed since the largest German battleship ever built. At that time began its first and final journey across the seas. The mission would not last even 2 full weeks, but it would be enough to catapult the vessel into the annals of naval history as one of the most recognizable names among all the warships that have ever sailed the oceans. The same operation would also generate decades of fervent debates in academic papers and discussions about virtually every detail of the vessel, its crew, its mission, and its adversaries. This is the narrative of Operation Rheinübung, the final journey of the battleship Bismarck, a saga that transcended the limits of naval conflict to become a maritime legend. Nazi Germany perfectly understood that the United Kingdom relied on imports of all types of materials, from basic supplies to military equipment, to keep itself supplied during the conflict. Both world wars witnessed determined efforts to break those supply chains and thus force the British Empire out of the war. The British, equally aware of this vital risk, had developed the convoy system during the First World War and made significant advances in the field of anti-submarine warfare during the interwar period. Admiral Dönitz desired hundreds of submarines to carry out this crucial task, but at the start of the war, he possessed far fewer than that, many of which were coastal submarines that could never operate in the depths of the Atlantic. Although more submarines were continuously being built, they were also being sunk at an increasingly worrying rate for the German command. Therefore, the Kriegsmarine had to try to inflict more damage on Allied shipping using other tools at its disposal. Disguised merchant ships, the so-called raiders, heavy cruisers, pocket battleships, and the 2 battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had all been allocated for this purpose with varying levels of success. One of the main issues German surface raiders faced was that with the Royal Navy being significantly larger than their opponents, while the Germans had to consider what use they would make of their few battleships, the British simply deployed their older, less modernized battleships as convoy escorts and still kept the modern battleships in action in other operational theaters. This strategy proved to be a highly effective deterrent against surface raiders, as even an old Revenge or Queen Elizabeth-class vessel was still more than a match for anything the Germans had sent out thus far, should it come to a gunnery duel. Even the 2 Scharnhorsts had avoided engaging with such a vessel, and although it was possible they could have won a battle against an old Revenge-class ship, the resulting damage to themselves would almost certainly have resulted in the loss of one or both ships, either in the fight or soon after from subsequent attacks, and the convoy would most likely have escaped. However, the Kriegsmarine had a new card in its hand, a brand new battleship, the Bismarck, much larger and faster than the old British battleships, equipped with the latest German radar and fire control systems, as well as new high-power 380mm guns with a rapid reload system when functioning properly. Such a vessel could confidently face almost any convoy escort it was likely to encounter, especially when operating alongside other ships in a small squadron. Initially, the plan was to sail in company with 1 or 2 Hipper-class heavy cruisers, as well as the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Bismarck's sister ship, the Tirpitz, was still undergoing final construction, so getting that vessel into the battlefield would also take too long. However, British air attacks had damaged both smaller German battleships at their anchorages on the French west coast, leaving only the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen available for operations. Although several light cruisers were also combat-ready, the Königsberg and Nürnberg classes possessed neither the range nor the sea-keeping capability to be considered useful in prolonged Atlantic operations. While the Bismarck represented a significantly powerful combat asset, the primary objective was economic warfare, not the destruction of military targets. Therefore, although its participation would allow engaging escorts to reach the merchant ships in the convoy, the main target in this operation was enemy merchant shipping. Enemy warships would be engaged only when that objective made it necessary and could be done without excessive risk. As in the Graf Spee expedition earlier in the war, supply ships with both provisions and fuel were dispatched in advance. While the previous mission had mainly needed the Altmark, 2 larger ships would require multiple replenishment stocks. Lutyens had requested a delay, as the Gneisenau was undergoing long-term repair after an aerial torpedo attack, but the Scharnhorst could be ready in a reasonable time, and this delay might allow the completion and crew training of the Tirpitz as well. Although the first ship had to meet them at sea, as it was stuck at the other end of the English Channel, these requests were denied, despite a certain degree of tactical soundness. Partially, this was to avoid a long period without major German surface ships in action, but it also reflected the growing impatience of the German High Command with the limited results obtained thus far by surface warfare against British shipping. The decision to proceed with the operation, using only the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen, represented a compromise between the need for immediate action and the tactical realities of the German naval situation. The German Naval Command was aware that every day of delay allowed the British to strengthen their defenses and improve their detection systems. Simultaneously, the window of opportunity for large-scale operations in the Atlantic was gradually closing as more American naval resources began to get involved in the conflict, even before the official entry of the United States into the war. The political and strategic pressure to demonstrate the German Navy's ability to decisively influence the course of the war through surface naval power was intensifying in the highest echelons of the German command. Operational planning for Operation Rheinübung reflected both the ambitions and the limitations of German naval strategy. The operation was conceived not only as a mission to disrupt maritime trade, but as a demonstration of German naval power that could have psychological and strategic ramifications far beyond sunken ships or destroyed cargo. The success of the operation could potentially alter the balance of power in the Atlantic and force the British to reallocate significant resources to the protection of their vital sea lanes. This reallocation, in turn, could relieve pressure on other fronts and give Germany a crucial strategic advantage at a time when the global conflict was expanding and intensifying. The meticulous preparation for the operation included not only the tactical planning of the mission itself, but also elaborate arrangements for resupply and logistical support. Oil tankers and supply ships were strategically positioned at predetermined points in the Atlantic, creating a support network that would allow the German ships to operate far from their bases for extended periods. This logistical infrastructure represented a significant investment of scarce resources and demonstrated the German commitment to the success of the operation. The complexity of these arrangements also highlighted the challenges inherent in long-range naval operations in wartime, where every element of the logistical chain represented a potential point of vulnerability that could compromise the entire mission. The selection of the crew and commanders for the operation reflected the importance the German command placed on the success of the mission. Admiral Günther Lutyens, a seasoned veteran with a deep knowledge of naval operations in the Atlantic, was chosen to command the task force. His prior experience with surface radar operations and his understanding of British convoy tactics made him the natural choice to lead an operation of such magnitude and complexity. Captain Ernst Lindemann, commander of the Bismarck, brought his own experience and expertise to the operation, creating a command partnership that combined strategic and tactical knowledge with seasoned operational leadership. The Bismarck represented the pinnacle of German naval engineering of the time, incorporating decades of technological development and combat experience. At 251 meters long and displacing over 50,000 tons when fully loaded, the battleship was a floating fortress equipped with 8 380mm main guns arranged in 4 twin turrets. These guns, capable of firing projectiles weighing over 800 kilograms to distances exceeding 35 kilometers, represented devastating firepower that few ships in the world could match. The German fire control system, considered one of the most advanced of the time, used precision telemetry equipment and mechanical computers to calculate firing solutions with remarkable accuracy, even in adverse combat conditions. Bismarck's protection was equally impressive, with a main armored belt ranging from 320 to 145 millimeters thick, depending on the protected area. The armored deck was up to 120 millimeters thick in critical areas, while the main gun turrets were protected by armor up to 360 millimeters at the front and 220 millimeters on the sides. This massive protection was designed to withstand the projectiles of the largest naval guns of the era, creating zones of immunity where the ship could operate with relative safety against enemy fire. The ship's internal compartmentalization system included over 2,000 watertight compartments, designed to keep the vessel afloat even after extensive damage caused by torpedoes or armor-piercing shells. The Bismarck's propulsion system consisted of 12 steam boilers feeding 3 turbine groups, generating a total power of over 150,000 horsepower. This power allowed the battleship to reach speeds exceeding 30 knots, an exceptional speed for a vessel of its size and weight. The combination of speed and firepower made the Bismarck capable of choosing its engagements, pursuing vulnerable targets while avoiding unfavorable confrontations. The operational range of approximately 8,000 nautical miles at cruising speed allowed for prolonged operations far from German bases, an essential capability for convoy interception missions in the Atlantic. The Bismarck's crew, composed of over 2,300 men, represented the best of the German Navy. Each crew member had undergone rigorous training, and many possessed prior combat experience. Officers were carefully selected for their technical competence and leadership, while the sailors included specialists in gunnery, navigation, engineering, and communications. The crew's level of training and discipline was considered exceptional, a reflection of the German naval tradition and the importance attached to the operation. During the months of preparation, intensive exercises were conducted to ensure all systems functioned perfectly under combat conditions. The departure of the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen from Gotenhafen on May 18, 1941, marked the official start of Operation Rheinübung. The timing was carefully calculated to take advantage of favorable weather conditions and minimize the probability of detection by British intelligence services. However, the preparatory movements did not go unnoticed by Allied observers. Norwegian resistance agents had already reported German naval concentrations, and British reconnaissance flights had identified suspicious activity in German ports. Despite these early indications, the German command maintained hope that the true nature and scale of the operation would remain hidden until it was too late for an effective response. The chosen route through the Danish Straits represented a delicate balance between speed and secrecy. While this route offered the fastest way to the open waters of the Atlantic, it also exposed the German force to surveillance and possible interception by British naval forces based in Scotland. Alternative routes through the North Sea or around Norway offered greater security, but would also require more time and fuel, precious resources that could make the difference between success and failure of the operation. Lutyens' decision to proceed through the straits reflected his confidence in the speed and firepower of his ships, as well as his assessment that tactical surprise would compensate for the additional risks. The first days of the operation proceeded as planned, with the German ships sailing in formation through the relatively protected waters of the Baltic. Radio discipline was rigorously maintained, with communications limited to the absolute minimum to avoid interception and triangulation by Allied intelligence services. Bismarck's own detection systems functioned perfectly, providing the German commanders with a clear picture of the tactical environment around them. Crew morale was high, fueled by confidence in their ship and the prospect of action after months of intensive preparation and training. The first real test of the operation came as the German ships approached the straits between Denmark and Sweden. This narrow, heavily guarded passage represented a critical choke point where detection became almost inevitable. British air and naval reconnaissance patrols maintained constant vigilance over these vital waters, recognizing their strategic importance as an exit route for German ships headed for the Atlantic. Lutyens knew that once detected in this area, tactical surprise would be lost, and the British would have enough time to organize a coordinated response. However, the available alternatives offered even less likelihood of success, leaving the German command with few options other than to rely on speed and determination. The passage through the Danish Straits was executed with military precision, but not without consequences. British observers confirmed the presence of large German naval units heading west, information that was immediately transmitted to the Admiralty in London. The British naval war machine began to mobilize, with orders being sent to naval bases throughout the region to intercept and destroy the German force before it could reach the Atlantic convoy routes. Admiral Sir John Tovey, commander of the Home Fleet, began preparations for what would become one of the greatest naval hunts of the Second World War. The hours following the initial detection were critical for both sides. For the Germans, every hour of advance without interception brought them closer to their intended operational area, and increased their chances of success. For the British, time was equally crucial, as they needed to position their forces to intercept the Germans before they could disperse into the vastness of the Atlantic. Radio communications intensified on both sides, with commanders coordinating ship movements and updating intelligence assessments. The deadly dance between predator and hunter had begun, setting the stage for confrontations that would define not only the fate of Operation Rheinübung, but also influence the broader course of the naval war in the Atlantic. The initial British response demonstrated both the strength and limitations of their naval power. Although they possessed significant numerical superiority and a network of well-positioned bases, the vastness of the ocean and the speed of the German ships created complex tactical challenges. British commanders needed to anticipate German intentions and position their forces appropriately, a task complicated by the fluid nature of naval warfare and the need to simultaneously protect multiple vital convoy routes. The decision to commit significant resources to intercept the German force reflected the British recognition that the success of Operation Rheinübung could have devastating consequences for their war effort. The Denmark Strait would become the stage for the first significant confrontation of the operation, an encounter that would fundamentally alter the course of subsequent events. On the morning of May 24th, adverse weather conditions and limited visibility created a complex tactical environment where precise detection and identification became extremely challenging. The battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy and symbol of British naval power, was sailing in company with the modern battleship HMS Prince of Wales under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. This force represented a formidable concentration of naval firepower, with the Hood carrying 8 381mm guns and the Prince of Wales equipped with 10 356mm guns, the most modern available at the time. The approach of the opposing forces through the icy waters of the North Atlantic created a palpable tension that transcended purely tactical considerations. For the Germans, this confrontation represented the first real test of their capabilities against the established naval power of Great Britain. For the British, the impending battle carried the weight of centuries of naval supremacy and the responsibility of keeping the vital sea lanes open for the Allied war effort. The decisions made in the following minutes would have ramifications that would extend far beyond the immediate outcome of the confrontation. Admiral Holland opted for an aggressive tactical approach, seeking to close the distance quickly to maximize the effectiveness of his armament and minimize the range advantage of the German guns. This decision reflected both traditional British naval doctrine and the understanding that a prolonged engagement at long range would favor the Bismarck's more advanced fire control systems. The British formation advanced in line abreast, with the Hood leading and the Prince of Wales following in its wake, a disposition that concentrated firepower but also created specific tactical vulnerabilities. The start of the bombardment marked a decisive moment in modern naval history. The first shots were exchanged at a distance of approximately 25 kilometers, with both sides quickly adjusting their aiming systems to compensate for relative motion and atmospheric conditions. The initial accuracy of the German gunners surprised British observers, who expected a longer period of ranging before effective shots were achieved. The Bismarck and the Prince Eugen operated in close coordination, with their fire control systems sharing data to maximize the effectiveness of their combined bombardments. The first phase of the engagement unfolded with an intensity that few naval veterans had previously experienced. Multi-ton projectiles sliced through the air at supersonic speeds, creating spectacular columns of water when they missed their targets. The ships maneuvered constantly to avoid enemy fire while maintaining their own firing solutions, a deadly dance executed by tens of thousands of tons of steel masses. The ship's internal communication systems transmitted orders and damage reports in a constant flow, while the crews struggled to keep their equipment functioning under the extreme conditions of naval combat. The tragedy that followed shocked not only the immediate participants, but also naval observers around the world. Within minutes of the start of the bombardment, a salvo from the Bismarck found its target with devastating precision. The German projectile, weighing over 800 kilograms and traveling at tremendous speed, penetrated the Hood's defenses at a critical point that exposed the ship's main ammunition magazines. The resulting explosion was visible for kilometers, sending a column of fire and smoke hundreds of meters into the air. The hood, which had represented British naval power for over 2 decades, disappeared beneath the waves within minutes, taking almost its entire crew of over 1,400 men with it. The destruction of the hood had ramifications that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. For the Royal Navy, the loss represented not only a tactical blow, but also a profound psychological shock that questioned fundamental assumptions about British naval invincibility. For the Germans, the victory brought validation of their technical and tactical capabilities, but also intensified the British determination to seek revenge. The Admiralty in London immediately redirected massive resources to locate and destroy the Bismarck, transforming the German operation from a commerce interdiction mission into a race for survival. The Prince of Wales, a solitary survivor of the initial confrontation, continued the engagement despite the damage suffered and the shocking loss of its consort ship. The young battleship, still undergoing final adjustments to its armament systems, managed to hit the Bismarck several times before withdrawing to avoid additional destruction. One of these projectiles caused significant damage to the German battleship's fuel system, creating an oil slick that would become crucial for subsequent events. This apparently minor damage would fundamentally alter the tactical options available to Lütjens and decisively influence the final outcome of the operation. Lütjens' decision to separate his forces after the engagement in the Denmark Strait reflected a sober assessment of the tactical and logistical realities he faced. Although the Bismarck remained a formidable fighting force, the damage to the fuel system severely limited its operational range and its ability to conduct prolonged operations against convoys. The Prinz Eugen, less damaged and with greater autonomy, was detached for independent operations against shipping, while the Bismarck headed for German-controlled ports in occupied France for essential repairs. This decision, although tactically justifiable, also facilitated British location and interception efforts. The concentration of British naval resources in a single area became more feasible when the objective narrowed down to a single ship, regardless of how powerful it was. Admiral Tovey coordinated a massive search operation that involved practically all available naval resources in the North Atlantic, including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. The net gradually closed around the Bismarck as the German battleship struggled to reach the relative safety of the French ports. The hours that followed the initial engagement were marked by an intense search and evasion campaign that tested the capabilities of both sides to the limit. British radar and detection systems, although less advanced individually than their German counterparts, compensated through volume and coordination. Multiple ships and aircraft worked together to maintain contact with the Bismarck, transmitting real-time position information to the interception forces converging from various directions. For the Germans, every hour of progress without detection brought them closer to salvation, but also consumed precious fuel and reduced their tactical options. The pursuit of the Bismarck became an operation that captured global attention, transcending purely military considerations to become a symbol of the broader struggle between Allied and Axis forces. Press reports followed every development, as governments on both sides recognized the political and propaganda implications of the outcome. For the British, allowing the Bismarck to escape after the destruction of the Hood would be unacceptable both militarily and politically. For the Germans, the safe return of their most powerful battleship would demonstrate the viability of large-scale naval operations against Allied sea lanes. The aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal emerged as a crucial element in the final phase of the hunt, demonstrating the growing role of naval aviation in modern warfare. The Swordfish aircraft based on the carrier, although seemingly obsolete with their biplane structures and relatively low speeds, proved surprisingly effective against heavily defended naval targets. The ability of these aircraft to operate in adverse weather conditions and execute precise torpedo attacks made them ideal for the mission of delaying or incapacitating the Bismarck. The success of these air attacks would mark a turning point in the history of naval warfare, demonstrating that even the most powerful battleships were vulnerable to coordinated naval air power. The approach of the British aircraft through the stormy conditions of the North Atlantic represented a remarkable demonstration of skill and courage by the naval aviators. Flying in formation through ocean storms, locating a moving target in the vastness of the sea, and executing coordinated torpedo attacks required not only exceptional technical competence, but also extraordinary determination. The Swordfish pilots knew they were facing one of the most powerful and well-defended ships in the world, equipped with state-of-the-art anti-aircraft systems and crewed by experienced veterans. However, the importance of their mission and the memory of the destroyed Hood provided sufficient motivation to overcome any hesitation. The torpedo attack that followed became one of the most dramatic moments of the entire operation. The British aircraft approached the Bismarck through an intense barrage of anti-aircraft fire, with shells exploding around them as they maintained their attack trajectories. The coordination between the pilots was exemplary, with multiple aircraft attacking simultaneously from different directions to overwhelm the German defenses and maximize the chances of a hit. The culminating moment came when a torpedo struck the Bismarck's rudder, causing damage that would irrevocably alter the German battleship's fate. This single hit transformed the most powerful German warship from predator to prey, severely limiting its maneuverability and sealing its doom. The damage to the Bismarck's steering system created a desperate tactical situation for Lütjens and his crew. With the rudder jammed in an inclined position, the battleship could only sail in wide circles, making it impossible to maintain a straight course for the safety of the French ports. The heroic efforts of the crew to repair the damage or create alternative steering systems demonstrated the professionalism and dedication of the German sailors, but the technical limitations and the urgency of the situation made these efforts inadequate. Time was running out quickly as British naval forces converged from all directions, transforming what had been a race against time into an inevitable death sentence. The night preceding the final confrontation was marked by an atmosphere of solemn resignation aboard the Bismarck. Lütjens and Lindemann transmitted their final assessments of the situation to the command ashore, recognizing that the prospects for survival were minimal. The messages sent during these final hours reflected not only the tactical reality of the situation, but also a deep understanding of the historical significance of the unfolding events. The Bismarck's crew prepared for the final battle with the discipline and determination that characterized the German Navy, determined to fight to the end, regardless of the odds against them. The dawn of May 27th brought with it the approach of the British naval forces that had pursued the Bismarck across the Atlantic. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, two of the Royal Navy's most powerful battleships, led the interception force accompanied by supporting cruisers and destroyers. The concentration of naval firepower converging on the Bismarck was overwhelming, representing decades of British naval experience and the accumulated determination of generations of sailors. For the Germans, isolated and immobilized in the middle of the hostile ocean, the approach of these forces symbolized the inevitable end of their epic journey. The final battle that ensued was characterized by a devastating intensity that few naval confrontations in history would equal. The Bismarck, despite its maneuvering limitations, continued to put up a fierce resistance, with its main guns firing coordinated salvos against the British attackers. The German crew fought with desperate determination, knowing that every minute of resistance was a demonstration of military honor and naval professionalism. However, the British numerical superiority and the Bismarck's limited maneuverability created a situation where the outcome was inevitable, transforming the battle into a tragic demonstration of courage against impossible odds. The progressive destruction of the Bismarck during the hours of intense bombardment revealed both the strength and limitations of the battleship design of the time. Although the ship's main armor initially resisted the British projectiles, the secondary systems and superstructure suffered increasing damage that gradually reduced the vessel's combat effectiveness. Gun turrets were put out of action, communication systems were destroyed, and fires spread through various sections of the ship. Despite this, the main hull remained intact, demonstrating the fundamental soundness of the German design, while also illustrating the challenges of sinking a modern battleship with artillery fire alone. The Bismarck's final hours were marked by individual acts of heroism and sacrifice that transcended the national and political divisions of the conflict. German sailors remained at their posts even when the situation became desperate, maintaining military discipline under extreme conditions. Survivors' accounts describe scenes of camaraderie and duty that exemplified the best aspects of naval tradition, regardless of the flag under which they served. These final moments also revealed the common humanity that united the combatants on both sides, a humanity that persisted even amidst the destruction and death that surrounded them. The final decision to abandon the ship reflected the recognition that additional resistance would be futile and would only result in unnecessary loss of life. Lindemann gave the order for the crew to abandon ship, although he himself chose to remain aboard, along with many of his officers. This decision personified the naval tradition that the captain is the last to leave his ship, a tradition that transcends nationalities and represents the pinnacle of naval responsibility and honor. Preparations for the abandonment were executed with the same discipline that had characterized the entire operation, demonstrating that even in defeat, the professional standards of the German Navy remained intact. The rescue efforts that followed revealed remarkable aspects of human nature that persisted even in the brutal context of naval warfare. British ships maneuvered dangerously close to the sinking Bismarck to rescue German survivors from the icy waters of the Atlantic, demonstrating that humanitarian considerations could overcome national and military animosities. These rescue actions represented some of the noblest moments of the entire operation, illustrating that even in war, codes of naval honor and basic human decency continued to exert a powerful influence on the behavior of combatants on both sides. The Bismarck's final moment came as the proud battleship disappeared beneath the waves of the North Atlantic, taking most of its crew of over 2,300 men with it. Only 116 survivors were rescued from the icy waters, a tragically small number that illustrated the fundamental brutality of modern naval warfare. Among those saved was Wilhelm Wick, whose later experience in the Atlantic waters would become a moving testament to human resilience and the will to survive against impossible odds. His 3-day journey floating alone in the ocean, sustained only by hope and prayer, symbolized the experience of countless sailors who faced the relentless sea during the global conflict. The circumstances of the final sinking remained the subject of intense debate among naval historians and engineers for decades after the event. Conflicting evidence on whether the ship was sunk by British bombardment or by German scuttling charges reflected the complexity of the tactical situation and the chaotic nature of the final moments of the battle. What remained undisputed was that the Bismarck was doomed long before it disappeared beneath the waves, with massive structural damage and destroyed critical systems making survival impossible. The question of who exactly delivered the final blow became less important than the recognition that the German battleship had fought to the end against overwhelming odds. Lieutenant von Müllenheim-Rechberg, Bismarck's artillery officer and one of the few survivors, provided first-hand accounts that became valuable historical sources for understanding the final events. His descriptions of the last moments aboard revealed both the exceptional professionalism of the German crew and the magnitude of the damage suffered by the ship. His accounts also illustrated how different areas of the ship experienced the battle in distinct ways, with some sections maintaining relative operability, while others were completely devastated by the British bombardment. This fragmented perspective highlighted the complex and chaotic nature of modern naval combat, where individual experience depended greatly on physical location during the battle. The destroyer HMS Dorsetshire emerged as the main rescue ship, with its crew demonstrating exceptional courage in maneuvering dangerously close to the sinking German battleship. A British midshipman jumped over the side to help injured German sailors climb up the ship's sides, an action that exemplified the best aspects of the naval tradition of mutual assistance in emergency situations. These individual acts of courage and compassion provided moments of light amidst the massive tragedy unfolding, demonstrating that fundamental human values could persist even in the most extreme circumstances of war. The German submarines U-556 and U-74 arrived later in the search area, but found only wreckage and bodies floating in the Atlantic waters. The weather ship Sachsenwald also managed to save 2 Bismarck sailors, while other smaller vessels contributed to the rescue efforts within their limited capabilities. The total number of survivors, although tragically small, represented a testament to the effectiveness of coordinated rescue efforts and the determination of the rescue crews to save as many lives as possible, regardless of the survivors' nationality. The immediate repercussions of the battle reverberated throughout the entire British naval hierarchy, generating both celebration and controversy. Admiral Tovey reported to the Admiralty on the success of the operation, but moves were also made to prosecute Rear Admiral Wakewalker and Captain John Leach of the Prince of Wales for not having continued the battle with the Bismarck after the Hood had been sunk. This proposal generated a furious response from Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, who threatened to resign his position as commander of the Home Fleet and appear at any court-martial as a friend and defense witness for the accused. The proposal was quickly abandoned in the face of this determined resistance. A British inquiry quickly investigated the cause of the Hood's explosion and produced a report, but due to the haste of its preparation, it was noted that not all evidence had been collected. Consequently, a second inquiry was convened which also looked for similar weaknesses in other British capital ships in light of the identified problems. This second inquiry agreed with the first's conclusion that a 380mm projectile from the Bismarck had caused the explosion of the Hood's stern ammunition magazines. This discovery led to the modernization of some older battleships with improved deck and magazine protection, in addition to other related improvements. The remarkable performance of HMS Rodney against the Bismarck resulted in the ship being kept under close surveillance by the Home Fleet for some time as insurance against the emergence of the Tirpitz. Only with the entry of more King George V class ships and the United States into the war could the Rodney be released for other duties. This decision illustrated how individual tactical success could influence broader strategic planning, with effective ships being held back in defensive positions due to their proven value in combat. In Germany, Admiral Raeder formally reported the loss of the Bismarck to Hitler in early June. Hitler questioned why Lutyens had not fought the Prince of Wales to return to port the way he had come after the Battle of the Denmark Strait, arguing that even if it resulted in the loss of the Bismarck, the British would have lost 2 capital ships. Raeder admitted that, viewed in retrospect, the defeat of the Prince of Wales would have been a greater victory. However, Lutyens had to keep his operational orders in sight while his ships were in a position to execute them, which meant attempting operations against merchant shipping whenever possible. For the Kriegsmarine, the sinking of the battleship Bismarck was probably the single worst blow of the war. Shortly after, and as a result of Operation Rheinübung, the Germans would abandon the use of heavy surface warships against Atlantic convoys and concentrate their efforts on submarines, while Germany's capital ships would be positioned in Norway, threatening the Arctic convoys. This fundamental strategic shift represented the recognition that large-scale surface radar operations had become unsustainable in the face of the coordinated Allied response. The discovery of the Bismarck wreck in 1989 by Dr. Robert Ballard, who had previously found the Titanic, provided physical evidence that revived debates about the exact circumstances of the sinking. The wreck rests upright almost 5 kilometers below the surface, with this initial research finding no underwater perforations in the ship's armored belt, although a good portion of this area was submerged under mud. 8 holes were found in the hull above the waterline, but Ballard noted that he found no evidence of internal implosions, which occur when a hull that is not fully flooded sinks. While this suggests that the Bismarck's compartments were flooded when the ship sank, it does not directly support theories of scuttling or bombardment, as there were many holes in the ship that were repeatedly submerged before the ship sank, in addition to the various torpedo impacts. Therefore, comprehensive flooding could have come from one source, the other, or both. The entire stern separated approximately where the Swordfish torpedo hit, raising questions about possible structural failures, which were a recurrent problem in the sterns of several large German warships of the World War II period. 3 subsequent expeditions were conducted to the wreck site, each reaching different conclusions about the exact circumstances of the sinking. The fact that a good portion of the Bismarck's lower hull remains under mud does not make the matter much easier, complicating definitive analyses of the structural damage. Despite their divergent views, the various experts involved generally agree that the Bismarck would have eventually sunk, and any scuttling charges merely accelerated the inevitable. Regarding the acceleration involved, the four expeditions presented four different opinions, reflecting the continuing complexity of determining precise historical truth through limited physical evidence. Ballard noted that, as far as he was concerned, the British had sunk the ship, regardless of who delivered the final blow. This pragmatic perspective recognizes that while the specific details of the sinking remain the subject of academic debate, the operational result was unequivocal. Operation Rheinübung resulted in the destruction of the most powerful German warship and the effective elimination of the threat of German surface raiders in the Atlantic. The historical importance of the operation transcends the technical questions about the Bismarck's final moments, encompassing much broader strategic implications for the course of naval warfare. The strategic consequences of Operation Rheinübung extended far beyond the loss of a single ship, regardless of its individual importance. The operation marked the effective end of the German doctrine of surface warfare in the Atlantic, forcing a fundamental reorientation of German naval strategy towards submarine warfare. This shift had profound ramifications for the subsequent development of the Second World War, influencing both German naval construction priorities and the allocation of Allied naval resources. The failure of the operation also demonstrated the inherent limitations of individual raider operations against an enemy with overwhelming numerical and logistical superiority. The experience of Operation Rheinübung provided valuable lessons about the evolving nature of naval warfare in the 20th century. The effectiveness of naval air attacks against surface targets, demonstrated by the crucial success of the Swordfish biplanes against the Bismarck, foreshadowed the rise of naval air power as a dominant factor in maritime warfare. This lesson would be dramatically reinforced in the Pacific theaters, where carrier battles would determine the balance of naval power. The demonstrated vulnerability of even the most modern battleships to coordinated air attack accelerated the transition of world navies toward carrier-centric doctrines. The importance of radar and electronic detection systems, evidenced by both the successes and limitations of both sides during the operation, highlighted the growing influence of technology in modern naval warfare. The subsequent development of more sophisticated radar systems and electronic warfare techniques would be directly influenced by the lessons learned during the pursuit of the Bismarck. The operation also demonstrated the critical importance of signals intelligence and communication coordination in large-scale naval operations, setting precedents that would influence the development of electronic warfare capabilities for decades. The psychological impact of the operation on both sides was equally significant. For the Germans, the loss of the Bismarck represented not only a tactical setback, but also a blow to national morale and confidence in the Kriegsmarine's ability to effectively challenge British naval dominance. The death of Lutyens and Lindemann, two of Germany's most respected naval commanders, deprived the German Navy of experienced leadership at a crucial time. For the British, although revenge for the loss of the Hood provided psychological satisfaction, the operation also revealed significant vulnerabilities in their own ships and tactics that would require urgent attention. The influence of Operation Rheinübung on the development of Allied naval tactics was profound and lasting. The successful coordination of multiple naval forces, including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, aircraft carriers, and land-based aircraft, established precedents for subsequent combined naval operations. The search and tracking techniques developed during the pursuit of the Bismarck would be refined and applied in future operations, contributing to the evolution of modern naval doctrines. The operation also demonstrated the critical importance of timely intelligence and secure communications in coordinating large-scale naval operations. The legacy of Operation Rheinübung in popular memory and naval history transcended purely military considerations to become a symbol of individual courage and sacrifice in the face of impossible circumstances. The stories of heroism on both sides, from the Swordfish pilots to the Bismarck crew, captured the public imagination and contributed to enduring narratives about naval honor and military professionalism. These human stories provided emotional context for events that might otherwise be reduced to technical analysis and tactical statistics. The operation also established important precedents for humanitarian conduct during naval warfare. The coordinated rescue efforts after the Bismarck's sinking despite the tactical risks and national animosity, demonstrated that traditional naval codes of conduct could persist even in the most extreme circumstances. These actions would influence the subsequent development of international protocols for humanitarian assistance in combat zones and contribute to the evolution of the laws of naval warfare. Retrospective analysis of Operation Rheinübung continues to provide valuable insights into strategic planning, tactical execution, and decision-making under extreme pressure. The mistakes and successes of both sides offer enduring case studies for naval and military education, illustrating both the possibilities and limitations of naval power in modern conflicts. The operation remains a classic example of how technical, human, and circumstantial factors can interact to produce results that transcend initial planning and expectations. More fundamentally, Operation Rheinübung represents a moment of transition in world naval history, marking the end of the era of battleships as the definitive weapons of naval power and the beginning of a new era dominated by aircraft carriers and submarine warfare. The fate of the Bismarck symbolized not only the end of a specific mission, but also the end of an entire era of naval warfare. The lessons learned during those 2 fateful weeks of May 1941 would continue to influence naval and strategic development for decades, establishing Operation Rheinübung as one of the most significant and instructive episodes in modern naval history. The narrative of the Bismarck's first and last voyage remains a testament to the complexity of modern warfare, where individual courage and technical competence collide with relentless strategic realities and overwhelming logistical advantages. The operation exemplifies how specific historical events can transcend their immediate circumstances to become enduring symbols of universal human themes: courage, sacrifice, duty, and the pursuit of honor in the face of impossible adversity. Thus, Operation Rheinübung remains not only as naval history, but as a human narrative that continues to resonate through the years, reminding us of both the possibilities and the costs of military ambition in times of global conflict.